bringing the people behind our food to life.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about knife techniques. If you were to pick one knife in your house that you would need for 95% of the stuff that you're cutting in your kitchen, this would be the one knife that you would want. This is a 10-inch chef's knife. This is the one you want to be good at. This is the one that you want to become an extension of your arm. This is the one that you want to practice with. And we use 10 inches primarily here at the shop because this is good for everything. And if you're going to have one knife, why not have one that's good for everything? This right here is the bolster of the knife. You're going to either pinch the bolster of the knife and wrap your fingers around the handle or pinch the blade itself. You're going to choke up on the knife just like you would choke up on a bat. This is going to give you more control over the knife than if you were back here like this. This hand's going to be curled up, so if you were a piano player, you're going to be up on your fingertips with your knuckles pushed forward a little bit. It doesn't do any good to curl up your fingers if your thumb is sticking out there, so get your thumb back behind. Most chefs right up against one, two, or both knuckles when they're doing that rocking motion, and that generally is what makes us really fast. And that's so that we can cut and we know exactly where the knife is and exactly where our fingers are, and the fingers are not underneath the knife. It's really important that you're just paying attention to what you're doing, and if you're not comfortable with that, just keep your knuckles back behind. You don't need to have them up against the blade. And we'll talk more about how to cut stuff up as we move. All right, the first thing I'm gonna do is zest an orange. And we have several different tools here that we're gonna use first to zest the orange. One of the things that's really important to me is that I utilize all of the food. This is called a channel knife, and this does the wide, long strips of zest that you would put into a cocktail or a drink with the intention that somebody's not gonna eat that, because while it may smell of orange or blood orange or grapefruit or lime, it tastes very bitter. We're very dumb when it comes to taste. We can't taste a whole lot. We can taste sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is savory. That's it. That means that everything else that's happening in your food is all happening up in your nose. It's all happening in your olfactory region. So aromatics are incredibly important when you're talking about food. And this is where you're gonna get all of the aromatics that you want from citrus. You're gonna get far more flavor if you use the zest than you are if you ever use the juice. This is just generally referred to as a zester, and this does long, pretty curls of zest that you might use as a garnish on top of your salad or your creme brulee or your piece of grilled fish, with the intention that somebody is going to eat that. So we would blanch it first, which means either dunking it into boiling water or simple syrup or hot oil, and that pulls those bitter components out of it before we serve it to somebody. This is a microplane. That's just a brand name. If you want one of these, you just need to go to the hardware store and buy a wood rasp, but that's what this is. It's a wood rasp. And this does really super fine zest that gives you a lot of surface area. This is something that you would use in dressings or marinades or sauces or soups where you're gonna have a lot of surface area. And that's what this is. Whether you use this or this, for some recipes, might be totally personal preference. If you were doing like a lemon poppy seed scone, you might want the texture of the zest, or you might just want the flavor of the lemon and not necessarily the texture of the zest. So whether you use that or that is totally up to you. So when we cut stuff, and remember, we're holding the knife like this, we always try to cut a flat surface for ourselves so that stuff doesn't roll around on us. So cut both ends off of the orange, and then we're just gonna slice the orange right on the side like this. And then these perfectly cleaned up little sections of oranges are called supremes. Why do we do this? It's because it's pretty, for one, and we know that if things look pretty, people tend to think that they're gonna taste good. So we like to make things that are aesthetically pleasing. And it's not using the white, which is usually considered the bitter part of the orange, so we're removing that as well. Notice how I'm not using a paring knife. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this knife because my knife is sharp. I'm letting it do the work. So I don't have to worry really about cutting towards myself here because I'm putting very little effort into it and I'm just being very careful about what I'm doing. So if I was gonna use this, I would juice this and use it in, the marinade or the dressing or the sauce. I would use my sections as well. And then I would use the zest as a garnish. And zest freezes really well, so if you don't know what to do with it immediately, you can always throw it in the freezer and then find another use for it at another time. Next, we're going to do a bell pepper, and I'm going to show you how we cut a bell pepper here at the shop. So, cut the top off, cut the bottom off, straight down the side, and then just unroll it. The reason that we do it like this is for a couple of different reasons. One, we mean something really specific when we're talking about large dice or medium dice or small dice. A large dice is 3/4 of an inch cubed, a medium dice is 1/2 of an inch cubed, a small dice is 1/4 of an inch cubed. It's not important that you know what that means. The important part is that you cut things in a uniform way. If you can cut things in a uniform way, they're going to cook in a uniform way. And having a piece like this is going to give you a better surface in order to cut things in a little bit more uniform way. The other reason that we do this is we try to be more efficient in the kitchen. And what's going to make you faster and cut your cooking time in half is if you can be more efficient. And so we talk about kind of the assembly line method in the kitchen, doing all one cut one way, then all your next cut, and then all of a next cut. So we talk about it in terms of planks and lengths and dice. So here's your plank. If I had to do a bunch of bell peppers, I would cut all my bell peppers like this first, and then I would cut all of my lengths. And then when that was finished, then I would cut all of my dice. That is going to make you faster in the kitchen than if you're doing this. One at a time. So that's the reason why we cut all of it like that. And that's how you cut a bell pepper. If you want thinner pieces like a julienne, you can just cut thin pieces like this and you're going to get a much more uniform cut. If you're curious about that rocking motion, the rocking motion is what we do to make things a little bit faster in the kitchen. It's pulling back the tip of the knife and pushing forward with the base. Pulling back with the tip and pushing forward with the base. All your strength is on that push. That's when you're going to be doing all your cutting. Basically, your arm is just going back and forth. So you got to relax. Keep your shoulders away from your ears. Remember your yoga. Pull back the tip, push forward with the base. Pull back the tip, push forward with the base. That's that rocking motion. And once you master that, that's going to make you much faster in the kitchen. Next, we're going to do chard. This is a method that you can use for any leafy greens, whether it's collard greens or chard or spinach. In terms of peeling it, all you have to do is really get the bottom started and then you can just pull the stem out. The stem's totally edible, so if you want to cut up the stem with your leaves, you are welcome to do that. Chard in particular stems tend to taste a little bit like dirt, but I like to cut them up and throw them in a little rice wine vinegar and pickle them, and then they're really awesome on top of salads and stuff. So once you have them peeled, what you're going to want to do, we're going to do a chiffonade, and like I said, this is good for any leafy greens, including spinach, basil, sage, things like that. So line up all of your leaves, and you're just going to give them a quick roll. Doesn't have to be tight. And then you're going to slice them really thinly just on the side. And there's that rocking motion again. So that is going to give you a beautiful chiffonade that you can use for your salad or your saute or anything else. And that's, a lot faster than doing each individual leaf and kind of running your blade that way. Next, we're going to do ginger. This is your handy ginger spoon, and this is how we peel it. This is going to just take off the paper on the outside of the ginger. You're going to get a better yield off your ginger than if you use a peeler or a knife. And this goes around the nubbins, which I know everybody avoids. So using a spoon makes it much, much easier. And then once you have it peeled, we're just using a plain old box grater, small side of the box grater, plastic wrap on top. And what this does is it gives you a nice ginger puree with none of the fiber. I know, it's crazy. You might get a hole in your plastic wrap, but you're never gonna get pieces in your ginger, and then you can use the rest of the plastic wrap to wrap the rest of your ginger up. Now we have garlic. You're gonna just take the little woody end of the garlic and cut that off. Flat part of your blade away from you, give it a little punch, and that's how you're gonna peel it. Once you have all your garlic peeled, you can add a little bit of kosher salt to it if you want to. That kind of adds just a little bit of texture. It's like adding sandpaper to it. Helps break down the cell walls a little bit. As much as I like garlic, I don't want to smell like garlic, and garlic's really sticky, so I don't want to do this kind of movement. So once I've made a pass with my garlic, I'm going to actually use the knife to keep the garlic to the cutting board, and that's going to clean my knife off and keep the garlic in place on the cutting board as well. And once you make a few passes with it and your garlic's a little bit finer, you can press down really hard with the blade of the knife, and that'll actually help give you a nice puree depending on how fine you want your garlic at the time. People always ask me about garlic presses and whether they're okay or not. Garlic presses are totally fine. It just takes me less time to do this than it does to clean one. So there you have your garlic, cleaned off knife, and you don't smell like garlic. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to maintain your knife. If you were to look at the edge of your knife is actually made up of little teeth. And when you cut, those teeth get bent, and you need to bring those teeth back into alignment. And that's what this does. This is a steel. This is the same hardness as your knife. And when you use it, you want to go all the way from the end, all the way to the tip. And one of the things that people have the hardest time with is its 22.5-degree angle. It's all the way from the end, all the way to a tip, and you want to make sure that you maintain that angle the whole way. If that freaks you out, you can put your steel down on the table, and this piece right here should be at a 22.5-degree angle if your knife starts like that. So just draw it back. You should only have to do like 5 swipes on each side, and you should be good to go. In the industry, we do this every single time we cut. You should be doing this at home at least a couple times a week if you're cooking at home. You want to be honing all the time. Now, you could do this all day long at the wrong angle, and you're never going to put the edge back on your knife, but you're not going to do any damage to your knife. If your knife has never seen one of these in its entire existence, there may be no amount of honing that is going to put the edge back on your knife. You're going to have to recreate those teeth, and that's what this does. This is a diamond steel. This is harder than your knife. It's exactly the same motion, it's exactly the same angle, and we generally don't recommend that people have one of these at home unless they're very good at it, because this is really aggressive, and this takes metal off your knife and recreates those teeth. So I generally recommend that people take their knives in, have somebody sharpen them, like a couple times a year is all you really need to do, and then maintain them at home with a steel. And having a sharp knife is a safe knife. Anytime you have to apply a ton of pressure to your product because your knife is dull, that's when you have a chance of it rolling off, and that's when you're going to lose a digit. So it's really important to have a sharp knife, and that's going to make all the difference in the world with how much work you're doing with your fruits and vegetables. So with the onion here, we're going to cut the sprout end off, not the root end. Cut that off. That's your flat surface. Cut your onion in half, and that's when you want to peel it. Now, your onion is already in layers. You don't have to do any of this kind of cutting. Just because you saw it on the Food Network doesn't make it right. We call that the suicide cut. You're actually going to follow the lines on the onion. The onion's telling you how to cut it. Because it's a globe, if you cut towards the center, you're going to get a more uniform cut than if you're cutting straight up and down. So your knife is actually going to start in like this and move around towards the center, straight up and down, and then back towards the center again as you're going. You want this part of the knife to be hitting the cutting board. If that's hitting the cutting board, then your tip is up and you're not going to cut through the back of the onion. We don't do this kind of cutting in the kitchen very often. This is very hard on your body. So relax again, curl up your fingers, cut in towards the center, in towards the center, in towards the center, straight up and down. If you don't have any arm strength, you might have to make the noise. Hi-ya, hi-ya, hi-ya. Back towards the center again, and then straight up and down, and that's your diced onion. If it starts to splay out a little bit on you, tip it on its side, give it a little flat cut. That's going to give your knife something to grip, and then just keep cutting. And that's your diced onion. So if you want to do a julienne for the onion, the long thin pieces, you want to take this little root end off and just cut at a little bit of an angle like that to get the root, and then you can peel it. If I was to cut this way on an onion, I'm going to get little pieces on the inside and big pieces on the outside, so not very uniform cut. So what we're going to do is just go straight across following those lines again, and it's just going to be straight up and down. Once you get to the center, tip it over on its side and then just keep going. And that is going to give you a much more uniform cut. And that's how you julienne an onion. So remember, if you're going to have one knife in the kitchen, you want a good 10-inch chef knife. You're going to pinch the blade, wrap your hands around the handle like this, and keep this hand curled up. And that's how you're going to want to focus when you're practicing with your knife. And remember that you really do need a sharp knife in your kitchen. Don't be afraid of the sharp knife. It's all about practice. You know, give yourself a little bit of room and don't worry about getting it right. Just keep practicing. Go get a bag of onions from the store. They're really cheap, and then you can practice just like Julia Child did. Check out and see if there's classes available in your community. You might have a knife techniques class that you can take and build your confidence, because, you know, I think most people like to hear the noise as food goes into a pan, but really the majority of cooking is getting ready to cook. And if you can learn some techniques that are going to make your cutting a little bit easier in the kitchen, you're going to be all that faster. Thank you.
I think smithing gives me a kind of freedom, because it's a very fast process from the moment you imagine something and to your holding the end result in your hands.